Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today we're going to figure out which 5.56 weapons are best for you to use in Tarkov's midgame. Since the buffs to the 5.56 ammo type in patch 12.12.30, I do think it's a pretty competitive caliber now, especially if you're looking for lower recoil and cheaper builds typically than those weapons using the more powerful rounds such as BP or M80. So of the 9 5.56 weapons that we can choose from, my three favourites at the moment are the MDR, the SCAR-L and the AK-101. To understand why, let's focus on fire rate for a moment, because as has been the case since the original 12.12 update, a higher fire rate often ends up being detrimental to recoil overall. The ADAR and the TX-15 are semi-only, and so we're not going to look at these too much as we want a general rifle with full auto capability. At the bottom of the table we have the AK-102 with 600 RPM, the SCAR-L, MDR and AK-101 all with 650, the G36 at 750, the M4 at 800 and the HK-416 at 850. The AK-102's slow rate of fire but almost identical recoil to the 101 that we've looked at before, and only giving the user a few more points of ergo basically rules it out for me. At the other end of the spectrum, the M4s and HKs of this world can now be usable, but not really on a budget. You need to spend a lot on them to make them significantly better than the mid-tier weapons. The G36 can be used as a cheapish CQB weapon with its close to M4 fire rate, but it has ergo problems and the recoil profile is not amazing either. The three that we have left are the MDR, the SCAR-L and the AK-101, and what I like about all these weapons is that they are different enough between them to legitimately be used for different purposes, and because of their slightly lower fire rate have very controllable recoil without having to mod them too much. First up, let's look at the MDR. This is a seriously solid weapon for the price because out of all of the 5.56 guns it needs the least modding overall, which is great for a routine cheap weapon. On that basis, it's also quick to put together in the stash, and the high starting ergonomics lends itself to using a suppressor. While the initial recoil on the MDR is fairly good, it's a double-edged sword in this specific case because of its bullpup configuration. In Tarkov, recoil improvements from modifications are all centered around the base recoil, which is when you remove all of the components from the weapon, and for most guns this includes taking off the stock. For the MDR, the stock is intrinsically built into the gun and can't be removed, which means that the base recoil is much lower than other weapons at 87. While the upside of this is that the recoil you have when you buy it is pretty decent, the default loadout has 71, the percentage recoil improvement from mods like suppressors and foregrips don't work as well on the MDR because of this. Let's just take a quick example. The MDR's base recoil is 87 as we said, but the SCAR-L's is 143. Using an average suppressor such as the QDSS NT4, which has a 10% recoil reduction and 8% on the muzzle brake for 18% total, this removes 26 recoil points from a SCAR-L, but only 16 from an MDR. On this basis, you're actually disincentivized to mod the MDR extensively or use best in slot suppressors, so usually I just throw on a cheap foregrip like one of the M-Lock AFGs and the most budget suppressor I can find. Often this is the NT4 because they're very middle of the pack, but the Hybrid 46 can also work using the RAM barter. The RC2 is another good choice on top of an SF3P muzzle brake if the suppressor is trading cheaply on the flea market. I'll link my 5.56 suppressors table in the description too so you can see the differences, as these fluctuate around on the flea market, so it's worth checking a few before you buy one. I normally never recommend the hybrid because of its low recoil reduction, but as we saw it matters less on the MDR specifically, it can work out alright. On the flip side, the ergo is high already on this gun, so going for a low ergonomic reduction suppressor also doesn't matter as much, which is ultimately why I'm saying you can kind of do whatever you want. One other interesting suppressor is the Mini Monster, which can be bartered at Skier 2 because it doesn't increase the size of a weapon when attached. This keeps the MDR at 4 slots long, which can be cool for using in tight spaces and gives a potential advantage over other longer weapons. I often get asked what weapon to use in 5.56. If you're not sure, the MDR is very hard to get wrong, which is why I think it's such a good one to get used to. Cheap, decent stats and easy to mod. Next we have the SCAR-L. This weapon is the undisputed champion of budget low recoil in this caliber because it has a similar bullet spread profile to the MDR but with tighter horizontal control, and the separate stock allows for greater recoil reduction overall from modifications. The SCAR-L is best used if you feel that the MDR's recoil is not quite good enough, or you want to have the ability to full auto spray over a slightly longer distance, typically if you're taking it to longer range maps such as the outside of Shoreline or Lighthouse. But obviously we get nothing for free, and you do take a fairly large downside on the ergonomics for this improved recoil, which makes close range fights a bit more tricky, and you can get caught out more easily in bad positions, but sometimes it's a worthy trade-off. It also takes up quite a lot of screen real estate, which can block seeing enemies if you're unlucky. The SCAR costs a little bit more in terms of modding, partly because you can get the full benefit out of the muzzle devices, but also because there are a couple of extra pieces compared to the MDR. You could still go for a mini monster combo here on the suppressors, and while it doesn't give the best recoil by any means, the extra ergonomics really helps the Scar in general. Otherwise, the RC2 is probably the best mix of recoil, ergo and price in my opinion. The stock, receiver and charging handle are all unchangeable, but you can add your own pistol grip this time to get some ergonomics back. I either use the Hogue OMRG or MOE AR15, as these are my preferences from Peacekeeper 3, as well as being able to use the MREX rail from Skier 3, which gives some extra recoil reduction and ergonomics and is compatible with both the long 18-inch and the 14-inch medium barrel versions. Onto this again, I tend to use one of the AFG M-Lock foregrips, as they are cheap on Peacekeeper 3 and they are good bang for buck on ergonomics and recoil reduction. Regarding the 3 barrel lengths, try to pick the one that you want from the flea market before spending money on changing them around. Typically the short and long barrels are found on the regular black version, whereas the medium barrel is found on the tan variant, but this is not always the case, so make sure you check them before you buy. Normally long barrels are the way to go in Tarkov, as typically you can get more ergonomics from other parts like pistol grips, but with the Scar's limited modding, I think you're probably better off going for the MDR instead if you want a snappier weapon, as you won't reach the better levels of recoil on the Scar with those versions anyway without using close to the best in slot suppressors. The final weapon that I like a lot for 5.56 is the AK-101. I have done a detailed video for 12-12-30 on this gun, which I'll link at the end, but as a broad overview, this gun allows you to achieve somewhat of a best of both between the Scar and the MDR. However, this is done through modding the weapon, so is likely to be more expensive than either of those other guns, but it can get you exactly the performance that you are looking for. A big benefit of the AK-101's flexibility is that by default it can be equipped with some of the AK-style muzzle brakes, especially the RRD from Mechanic 3, which has minus 19% recoil reduction and is on par with many of the mid-tier 5.56 suppressors. The other weapons here cannot use this, and so it's one of the best guns for the caliber to use unsuppressed, primarily if you're playing super aggressively and want extreme ergonomics. If you want to go suppressed, which is usually the case, then it can take all of the regular ones through the CNC Warrior adapter. With all of the modding potential that this gun has, it can be taken down to 37 recoil at the extremes, but balanced builds will often come to around the 50 recoil mark whilst retaining mid-50s ergonomics, even while suppressed. One big downside for the 101 is the 30 random mags only, although many players only use the 30s anyway, so that may well not apply to you. So while we have a much better selection of weapons than we used to for this caliber, a big issue for 5.56 in progression terms is the gap in performance between M855 and M856A1, which means that we can't really use this caliber until at least level 20 when we can theoretically unlock Workbench 2, or once we can access the ammo directly on Peacekeeper 2 after the Cult Part 1. Before then, M855 doesn't have enough penetration power to deal with common armor types and will leave you pretty frustrated, so should be avoided. M856A1 though is a very good round for the mid-game and deals with class 4 decently, with extremely good damage for a round of this type. One of the great things here also is that as you progress towards Peacekeeper 4 at level 37 and Skier 4 after that, is that M855A1 is a really nice upgrade as players move towards using class 5 armor instead. If you can manage to reach level 38, Skier's 90 rounds per reset for 526 rubles each is a really good deal and keeps these weapons incredibly cost effective to use for routine runs. Both M856A1 and 55A1 benefit from 5.56's incredible fragmentation chance, which puts their average damages even higher than what you see on the base ballistic charts. You'll get a fragmentation roughly every third shot with both of these ammo, and that means that 5.6A1 will deal 81 damage when it does, and 5.5A1 will deal 73.5 instead, which significantly decreases their time to kill overall in a variety of situations. This is one of the main reasons why I prefer 5.56 to 5.45. So in short, if you're still not sure, just pick the MDR as it's really hard to mess up modding it. If you like to set up on other players and have the element of surprise where better recoil shines and lower ergo is acceptable, then go for the Scar L. If you like to mod your guns and tailor exactly the performance that you need, then the AK-101 is probably the gun for you. On that note, if you're interested to see a more detailed deep dive into the AK-101 next, then check out this video. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, hit all the buttons if you enjoyed the video, and as always, have fun in your raids.